Good morning, everyone. I decided to pop in live today to have a little chat and introduce you to Michelle Dowker, who is from Canada and will be presenting at our summit. I hope you're not sick of my face yet. I know I've been bombarding you with lots of great interviews with presenters. There is still a lot more to come. I just wanted to address a couple of things. I'm getting a couple of questions from people who are quite anxious about missing out on the summit. But I just want to let you know a little bit around how it will work, because there is so much opportunity for you to be able to see these presentations for free. So it is a summit where each day will only be available for a certain number of hours, but it is over, I think it's like 36 hours. You will have access to each day. And unlike a lot of summits who actually schedule presentations for a certain time, and if you miss that time, you miss out, mine is not like that. You are able to view all of the speakers on the one day whenever you like, as long as it's within that 36 hours. So please don't get anxious about missing out. There is ample time. You will be able to view each day, but also obviously after the summit is over, you'll have the opportunity to buy lifetime access, and it's only $49 Australian, which is just such great value considering what you'll actually be getting. So I just wanted to allay those fears. There will be plenty of time. You won't miss out. As long as you have the dates in your diary and you can take it with you too, you'll be able to go into the program on your phone or your iPad. You don't have to be on the computer to watch it either. So let's bring in Michelle so she can talk about her presentation and meet you all. Here she comes. Hi, Michelle.
Hello.
Well, lovely to have you here. So did you want to start by sharing with everyone a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me here, Tracy. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, so my name is Michelle Dowker. I am a wellness strategist and coach with an educational background as a naturopathic doctor. My primary vision, my primary passion is to help women with endometriosis and autoimmune conditions get control over their symptoms, things like fatigue, brain fog, pain, and bloating. I'm passionate about this because I have these conditions myself. And it was through this journey of trying to get control over my symptoms that I, discovered both low carb and dietary alterations that, are important to take into consideration for these particular, health concerns. Yeah, I'm not sure if you want me to go into the story of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, so I mean, for a lot of people, certainly here in Australia, we're told with these conditions, there's no cure. I hear it all the time. There's no cure. It's something that you just have to live with. Mm-hmm. So did you want to talk a little bit about that and what the experience was for you? I'm assuming it did take you a long time to find, a way that worked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, just to preface this by saying that with both endometriosis and autoimmune conditions, it usually takes an average of 6 to 11 years just for a diagnosis.
Wow.
So it can make for a really confusing path. And for me, looking back at my past, I realized I've had both of these conditions, pretty much all of my life. Looking back at my symptoms, but I didn't actually get official diagnoses until 2017. Wow. Now, back in 2001, between 2001 and 2003 is kind of when my journey started. I was getting sicker and sicker, and I was going to the doctors, and the doctors were telling me there's nothing you can do. We've tried all the medications and nothing's working. You just have to live with it. And I didn't accept that. I kept looking for answers for myself, and somebody referred me to see a holistic nutritionist who told me to go gluten-free and dairy-free. Mm-hmm. And that really helped me get a big control over most of my symptoms. And it opened my eyes to the fact that, health isn't just about taking medications. What you eat has a huge role to play in how you feel and what your health is going to be like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's actually what inspired me to go back to school and become a naturopathic doctor. Because prior to that, I was actually on the path to, I had just completed a master's of science, and I was going to go into research in medical science and all of that, but I was actually too sick to continue before I had made my dietary changes. So I got my life back making these dietary changes, went back to school and studied to be a naturopathic doctor. And everything was well controlled with those dietary changes, as well as I was low sugar, because I was starting to notice that sugar made me feel worse. So that was another thing that I had made at that point. Until about 2016, there was a series of extreme stressors in my life. And actually studies show that emotional stressors and physical stressors can actually be triggers for both endometriosis and autoimmune conditions. And so I was no longer able to keep my symptoms under control with my diet that I'd been following. And during this time, I had been diagnosed then with the endometriosis and an autoimmune condition called lichen planus.
Oh, right.
And so I went to start the autoimmune paleo diet. I don't know if you've heard of that before. It's a very strict version of the paleo diet for autoimmune diseases. And I wasn't getting any better. And it was through, by happenstance, I was actually getting a colonoscopy, and I had to follow a low residue diet. So for 3 days, I had to eat only meat and white bread, but I don't eat white bread, so I just ate the meat. And all of a sudden, I felt so much better. I hadn't felt that good in like a year and a half.
Wow.
And I went, oh, that's weird.
Yes.
So after the colonoscopy, I went back to eating autoimmune paleo, and I started getting worse again. And so I started looking into, is this meat only thing? Is this a thing? Could this exist? And I actually found a whole community called the Carnivore Community. And I started doing some research, and somebody who's leading part of the community suggested a 30-day trial. Try it for 30 days. And I did. And my symptoms went away again. And it really opened my eyes to be like, something, what's going on here? And now there's couple of things. This whole experience opened my eyes up to two things. So first of all, there are certain components to certain plant foods that can trigger autoimmune symptoms. In the autoimmune protocol, they talk about some of them, like lectins and phytates and those types of things. But there are other ones that aren't necessarily addressed in autoimmune protocol, like oxalates and FODMAPs and histamines and those types of things. And I realized that those components I was reacting to. And I also realized that it opened my eyes to the fact that when I was following the autoimmune protocol, I was looking for alternatives to the gluten-free products that I was eating, right? So the baked goods and those types of things. And so I was actually eating a lot of cassava flour products, which are high in starch. And I was having a lot of honey and maple syrup and dates and those types of things because they're autoimmune friendly. However, I was finding that I was constantly needing snacks. I was always hungry to the point where I was shaky and hangry. Like obviously my blood sugar was being affected. And this period of going carnivore opened my eyes up to the fact that, hey, I can go several hours now between a meal and I'm not hungry. What is this?
What a revelation.
Right?
Yeah.
And so after a certain period of time, I decided that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life just eating meat.
Yeah.
And so I started to do a little bit of research in how I could start to reintroduce some plant foods. The first time I tried it wasn't so successful. I was getting a lot of symptoms again, but I was just kind of like introducing random things. So I actually created a list of foods according to their level of reactivity. trying to choose foods that were lowest in oxalates and histamines and FODMAPs and all those things first. And that I was a lot more successful when I did it that way.
So what's an example of some of the foods that are the lowest in those types of things?
So interestingly, one of the things that I've kind of discovered from my research and from, paying attention to other people that are kind of in that sphere, low sugar fruits tend to be the least reactive for myself and for a lot of people. And if you think about it this way, one of the theories out there as to why this whole, the plant thing might be an issue, particularly for anybody with an autoimmune condition. So plants have something called anti-nutrients. And so these anti-nutrients, they're there to protect the plant against things like bugs, so that the bugs don't eat the plant, because the plant can't fight back and defend itself like an animal can, right? Now, I guess in general, if somebody has a robust immune system and a healthy digestive system, they might be able to tolerate these anti-nutrients. But somebody who has autoimmune endometriosis, they have something called immune dysfunction. So their immune system is highly reactive. And usually there's a lot of inflammation, and that can cause inflammation in the digestive system, which can cause something called leaky gut. Now, if you combine leaky gut with a highly reactive immune system, you can end up with a situation where some of these anti-nutrients that might not be problematic for the average individual can be highly reactive for somebody with one of these conditions, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Now, if you think about fruit, fruit is designed to be eaten. The plant has designed fruit to be eaten by animals so that they can spread the seed, right? And so low sugar fruits, one of the things that I've discovered is not only does this high starch and high sugar was not only kind of triggering me to have these blood sugar dysregulation issues, but high sugar can also negatively affect the immune system. So it can make autoimmune issues worse and endometriosis worse. And so that's why the low sugar fruits are something that I find would be the best tolerated for anybody in this situation. So things like berries, but also things like olives and cucumbers and those types of things. I found personally were the best tolerated of all the vegetables and fruits that I've reintroduced.
It's interesting because I think a lot of the low carb vegetables don't necessarily work for someone with autoimmune conditions, like spinach and broccoli and cauliflower and stuff like that. So, and I know that you'll talk about that in your talk, but it is, I think as you say, it so depends on you as the individual, the current state of your health, your immune system, whether you've got conditions like that. And if you do, then, just going on the standard low carb or ketogenic diet, possibly won't, help with these symptoms.
Exactly. There's especially the general ketogenic diet, like they don't, it's designed for the general population, right? There's no, with the assumption that your immune system is functional and not highly reactive. And so they don't really take into consideration that there are some components to certain foods that are going to be problematic for some people, even though it's low carb. But that's the thing, is low carb in general can be really helpful to, help manage that blood sugar and the insulin, which can be really helpful to keep inflammation in check. So it's a helpful thing, but there's also other things to consider to make it even more effective.
That's fascinating. Was there anything else that you wanted to add on your sort of story before we talk about what you're talking about in the summit?
Let's see here. I wrote a couple of notes down. So that's kind of the the basic gist of it in terms of like how I discovered low carb. It was, it wasn't because it wasn't, most people discover it, through a weight loss journey. But for me, it was more, and I kind of like discovered it backwards.
Carnivore first.
But that's the thing is I know a lot of people say that, oh, well, they want to just kind of live the carnivore lifestyle, but I knew that wasn't gonna be long-term sustainable for me.
Yeah. Can I ask you what your plate looks like now on an average day? So what, you did do that carnivore for a month, but as you said, you brought stuff in. So is it okay? Can I ask you sort of what sort of stuff you would generally eat in a day?
Yeah. So with the carnivore, I actually did actually follow it for a good 6 to 8 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because I
wow.
found so much benefit to it.
Yeah,
I just said,
yeah.
I'm just gonna give myself some time here.
Because there are a lot
Um,
of people too do with carnivore, they will do carnivore and dairy, but obviously you didn't do the dairy side. You just
no.
did straight meat, fish, eggs. Did you have eggs?
Yeah, so for the
Yeah.
first while, I didn't. I just did the
Okay.
meat, and then I reintroduced it separately because it can,
Right.
especially the egg whites, can be highly
Yeah.
reactive.
With the is it histamine in the egg whites?
Well, there's certain proteins in egg whites as well that for autoimmune can actually be immune triggering.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
hmm and I actually have an anaphylactic allergy to dairy. I figured that one out in 2003. So I actually
Oh,
haven't touched dairy since 2003.
oh wow. Where do you get your calcium from, Michelle?
Mm.
Mm.
Actually, I believe there's a study out there. They were looking at milk drinkers and non-milk drinkers and the rates of bone and hip fractures. I think this study was out of Sweden, and I think they looked at like 20,000 people. I can't remember all the details right now, but they actually
Mm.
found that the drinkers had a higher incidence of bone fractures than the people who didn't drink milk. So,
Mm. Yeah, yeah. As we were talking about before we started, there's just so much information out there that isn't really, yeah, backed by science. But
yeah.
yeah. So what does your day look like now in terms of your day on a plate, roughly?
Yeah, so it does vary.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, so my partner, he's a hunter, so we have a lot of moose and meat and deer meat. So
Oh
in that's
wow.
pretty different than the average plate, but most
Yeah. And
most
very
of
fresh.
yes. So most of my meals are either going to be based on like ground moose or deer meat, or stewed moose or deer meat, or deer or moose steaks. Sometimes we have some chicken, and sometimes we have some pork to kind of give some variety.
Mm.
Um, I eat twice a day. So I do, I guess, intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
Usually my first meal of the day, I find that it kind of works best if my first meal of the day is just going to be a carnivore meal. And
Mm.
then
Mm.
second meal of the day, then we'll introduce vegetables. So the ones that are sort of my top vegetables right now are zucchini, cucumbers, lettuce. As well, I can actually do quite well with roasted peppers as long as I take the skin off.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
Mm.
Um, I believe it was Dr. Gundry. He's got a book called The Plant Paradox, and he talked about that with the nightshades, like
Yep.
tomatoes and
Eggplants.
eggplants and peppers. He
Yeah.
mentioned with the peppers and the tomatoes, I mean, nightshades can be aggravating for some people with autoimmune conditions, but
Yeah.
he mentioned that it's the skin and the seeds actually that are the most reactive and problematic.
Mm.
Sometimes I'll roast the peppers and take the skin off. It's a lot easier to take off after you roasted them. Or I'll make a tomato sauce with they've been peeled and the seeds have been taken out, and
Mm.
I tend to tolerate those that way.
Mm.
Again, those are low sugar
Awesome.
foods, right?
Yes, yes, that's right. Oh, that's excellent. And so, your presentation, so we're actually very lucky that you are actually doing two presentations in the
Mhm.
summit. So we have you on day, oh gosh, testing my memory. I think it's day 1 and day 3. So I've put your second one, which is on low carb and menopause,
Mhm.
on day 3. So obviously your topic around endometriosis is going to be hugely informative for anyone who has these autoimmune conditions, and you are going to go into a lot of detail around how, what people can try and how they can help with those conditions. Was there
Mhm.
anything else that you wanted to add on, on that talk, just in terms of what you're going to cover?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that a lot of people aren't actually aware of in terms of endometriosis, I mean, right now in the medical system, especially, it's more kind of treated like a hormonal issue.
Mm.
And while hormones are out of balance in terms of, there is an issue with endometriosis called estrogen dominance, which means
Yeah.
that there's an excess of estrogen being produced, especially locally at the endometriosis site, that's causing this imbalance or excess of estrogen that can cause a lot of symptoms. However, what's not yet common knowledge in the medical field, I've put a lot of pieces of the puzzle together in terms of what's coming out with research, is that the immune system plays a huge role in endometriosis, and that a contributing factor to endometriosis is something called immune dysfunction.
Mm.
And so what that means is that the immune system isn't working properly and it's reacting. And so as a result, there's a lot of inflammatory cells being produced, which causes inflammation. And it's these inflammatory cells that are actually triggering the production of this excess estrogen, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so treating the immune system and addressing immune reactivity is actually a much better way to get control over symptoms of endometriosis rather than just trying to treat the hormones.
Hormones.
Because
Mm.
once you stop the hormone treatment, the symptoms come back because it's the immune system that's leading to the hormone issue.
Fascinating.
If that makes
Wow.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes complete sense. Wow, what a fantastic talk. I can't wait. I can't wait to watch it. In terms of your second one around low
Mhm.
carbon menopause, thank you for doing that for us, because it's,
Yeah, pleasure.
oh, I think it's such a, I mean, I do get asked a lot about it. There's just not a lot of people out there talking about the benefits of low carb lifestyle and menopause. So what's that? What's a little snippet of your talk around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, especially this is the thing. I've worked with a lot of women because I've been working with Dr. Jay Wrigley,
Yeah.
Keto Doc CLT, and he's really the women's hormone guru. And but we've been working together to help women in menopause to lose the weight. And the common issue is they try, the ketogenic diet in terms of high fat, low carb, but they're not losing the weight.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is that once we kind of approach this sort of hormonal stage in our lives, hormones are acting differently. And,
Yeah.
one particular thing is that, your ovaries are producing less estrogen, and your fat cells actually also produce estrogen. So your body is trying to hold on to as much estrogen as possible. So
Mm.
this high fat diet of, taking in a lot of extra fat for somebody in menopause might actually not work very well. And we see this time and time again.
Mm.
So there's certain considerations to take into account in terms of, how you're maybe managing, the amount of macros of each of the things, of the three macronutrients. As like in terms of the amount of fat and protein, but as well, there are certain foods that can cause some problems in terms of someone going through menopause, that they might want to consider in terms of why they're not getting the benefits from a low carb diet in the way that they want.
Mm. Oh, fascinating. It seems to me, the more I'm in this space that, obviously I say all the time, this is what this is all about. You have to work it out, how it works for you as the individual, but particularly
Mhm.
for women, because we do go through these dramatic stages in our life. And, to just follow a standard approach, it just doesn't seem to work for so many women, which is, so why I wanted to do this women's only summit. But something like
Yeah.
fat, it can be such a lever. It can be really powerful to understand that you can use that to really, help with your goals, whether it's cutting it back. And we're never going to say go low fat, are we? It's not about going back to processed low fat foods, but it's looking at, embracing the natural fat in foods, but not
Exactly.
necessarily adding a whole lot more onto it and downing a whole lot of bulletproof coffees and stuff like that.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
see a lot of women, they are making the fat bombs and the bulletproof coffee, and they're doing all these things, but instead it's more important, like you said, focus on whole foods and the fat that comes in whole foods. And especially prioritizing protein, because actually I touch upon it in the presentation, but I see this time and time again when I'm doing my intakes is women fear protein. They're afraid that
Yeah.
it's going to make them gain weight. And
Yeah.
so many women don't even get in the recommended, the RDA minimum of protein that they should be getting each day. And I think that's, it's a pretty big one, I think, for anybody really to really pay attention to.
Absolutely. And I see it too. I talk about it all the time too. You know, generally as females, we under eat protein, but it's also because I think a lot of us don't understand there's such a push now for plant-based diet and plant-based living. And the protein found in that is so suboptimal compared to the protein found in animal products. And, you know, there's such a misconception that, you know, we can't sit down to a steak. I mean, it's just like the best thing that we can eat for our body. So it's definitely something, you know, I'm hoping that people start to understand. And, you know, there's we've got dietitians within the summit talking about what's actually in food. So forget about all the dogma and, you know, what everyone else says. Let's just look at what's actually in the food that we're eating and how it actually helps in our body. So when you take it that way, I think it can really, you know, help demystify a lot of that. And yeah.
And that's another thing, as you mentioned about these plant-based sources of protein. I mean, first of all, they're not as bioavailable and easily absorbable. And the other thing to take into consideration as well, I mean, in terms of my standpoint, when I'm focusing on helping my particular audience, is there are so many anti-nutrients in plant-based sources of protein, more so than just, you know, your regular vegetables. So things like soy and nuts and legumes, they're extremely high in a lot of potentially immune triggering compounds. And so, yeah, I see that as a specific for especially endometriosis, because a lot of people think that they need to go plant-based for endometriosis. And I see that a lot of people, they try it and then they're like, why isn't this working? And that might be a consideration.
Fantastic. Well, I know I've kept you, oh gosh, quite some time, but I just had one last question, if that's okay. Just one question I'm asking every presenter as they come through, because it's a question I get a lot, and I think it's a mental barrier for a lot of people. Is low carb sustainable? What's your view? I know you've touched on it here when talking about the carnivore and how it's, you know, it's not for you long term, but what's your overall view on just low carb being sustainable?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely low carb is, for me, more sustainable than carnivore.
Yes.
So this is the thing, is I know how I feel when I eat this way. And so that makes it worth it to me. And so it, you know, I don't even think now about, you know, there are days where I will have a little bit higher carb. And so, you know, kind of like a carb rotation. And, you know, once in a while is fine, but I know if I do that for too many days in a row, I start to get some joint pain and I start to maybe not feel optimal. So I know how it makes me feel. And so because of that, it's a sustainable option for me, because I know that it lets me, you know, live my life in the way that I want, without side effects, without symptoms of my conditions. And for me, that makes it sustainable.
Well, thank you so much. What an honor to meet you and chat to you and hear all you have, you know, all your knowledge and information. And I know in the summit, your talks are just going to be incredible. So I can't thank you enough for being a part of it. Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, my pleasure, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you later.